The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. All eyes were on the judge, a stern figure whose sharp gaze seemed to cut through the room. At the center of it all was a black woman, standing tall but visibly frustrated. Her name was Angela, and she had been fighting for hours, not just for herself, but for what she believed was right. The case seemed straightforward, but the tension in the room suggested otherwise. The judge had already made it clear where. He stood, his tone dismissive, his rulings one-sided. Angela's arguments, though well-reasoned, were met with skepticism, as if her very presence in the courtroom was an inconvenience. The audience, a mix of curious onlookers and legal professionals, could feel the imbalance, the unspoken weight of bias hanging in the air. But what no one knew, what the judge certainly didn't know, was that Angela wasn't just any defendant. She was hiding a secret, one that would change everything. The case had started like any other. Angela, a passionate advocate for social justice, had been caught in a legal battle with a powerful corporation accused of discriminatory practices. She had filed the lawsuit on behalf of a group of employees who claimed they'd been unfairly treated because of their race. The evidence was strong, the witnesses credible, but from the moment she stepped into the courtroom, it felt like the deck was stacked against her. The judge, a man in his late 50s with a reputation for being tough but fair, seemed unusually dismissive of her arguments. His tone was curt, his questions pointed, and his rulings consistently favored the corporation's legal team. Angela, though determined, could feel the frustration building. She had faced challenges before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about something deeper, something unspoken. As the hearing dragged on, the tension grew. The corporation's lawyers, a team of sharp-dressed attorneys with confident smirks, seemed to sense they had the upper hand. They interrupted her, challenged her evidence, and even questioned her credibility. At one point, one of them insinuated that Angela was exaggerating the claims, that she was playing the race card to win sympathy. The comment hung in the air, toxic and unchallenged. Angela clenched her fists under the table, her jaw tight. She wanted to lash out, to call out the injustice she was witnessing, but she knew she had to stay composed. This wasn't just about her, it was about the people she was fighting for, the ones who didn't have a voice in this room. But as the judge prepared to deliver what seemed like another unfavorable ruling, something inside her snapped. She stood up, her voice steady but firm. "Your Honor," she said, "before you make your decision, there's something you need to know." The room froze. The judge, mid-sentence, paused and looked at her, his expression a mix of curiosity and irritation. The lawyers for the corporation exchanged glances, their confidence wavering for the first time. Angela took a deep breath, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small badge, holding it up for everyone to see. The gold emblem glinted under the courtroom lights, and the room erupted in murmurs. The badge wasn't just any badge. It was the badge of a U.S. attorney. Angela wasn't just a plaintiff or an advocate. She was a federal prosecutor, one of the most respected legal professionals in the country. The judge's eyes widened, his face pale. The corporation's lawyers looked stunned, their smug expressions replaced with unease. Angela's voice cut through the noise, calm but commanding. "Your Honor, I didn't want it to come to this. But I can't stand by and watch this court ignore the facts. I'm not just here as a plaintiff, I'm here as a representative of the United States Department of Justice, and I can assure you, this case is far from over." The room was in chaos. The judge, clearly shaken, tried to regain control, but the damage was done. The balance of power had shifted in an instant, and no one knew what would happen next. Angela stood her ground, her eyes locked on the judge, waiting for his response. But before he could speak, one of the corporation's lawyers jumped to his feet, objecting loudly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. She can't just—" Angela cut him off, her voice sharp. "I can, and I will. This case isn't just about me, it's about justice, and if this court won't deliver it, I'll make sure someone else does." The tension was palpable, the stakes higher than ever. The judge, clearly conflicted, hesitated. He looked at Angela, then at the lawyers, then back at Angela. The room held its breath, waiting for his next move. But instead of ruling, he did something no one expected. He called for a recess, his voice unsteady. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour," he said, slamming his gavel. As the room emptied, Angela remained standing, her badge still in hand. She knew this was far from over. In fact, it was only the beginning. As the courtroom emptied, Angela remained at the plaintiff's table, her badge still clutched tightly in her hand. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but she refused to let it show. She had worked too hard, come too far, to let this case slip away. Around her, the murmurs of the departing crowd echoed like distant thunder, their whispers filled with speculation and disbelief. "Did you see that?" someone muttered. "A U.S. attorney? What's she doing here?" Angela ignored them, her mind racing. She had known this day would come, but she hadn't expected it to feel like this, like standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if the ground beneath her would hold. The truth was, Angela hadn't planned to reveal her identity. Not like this. She had hoped to keep her role as a federal prosecutor separate from this case, to fight for justice without the weight of her title influencing the outcome. But as the hearing unfolded, it became clear that the system wasn't going to play fair. The judge's bias, the corporation's arrogance, the way her arguments were dismissed as if they were meaningless, it was all too much. She had spent her entire career fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves, and she wasn't about to let this case become another example of the system failing those who needed it most. Angela's journey to this moment had been anything but easy. Growing up in a small, predominantly black community, she had seen firsthand how the legal system could fail the people it was supposed to protect. Her father, a hard-working mechanic, had been wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit when she was just a teenager. The case had dragged on for years, draining their family's resources and leaving them with a deep sense of injustice. It was during those long, painful court hearings that Angela had decided to become a lawyer. She wanted to be the voice for people like her father, the ones who were overlooked, dismissed, or outright ignored. And she had done it, graduating at the top of her class, landing a prestigious clerkship, and eventually becoming a U.S. attorney. But even with all her success, she had never forgotten where she came from. This case, this fight, was personal. The corporation at the center of the lawsuit was a giant in the tech industry, known for its sleek products and cutting-edge innovation. But behind the glossy facade, there were whispers of something darker. Allegations of racial discrimination, unequal pay, and a toxic work environment. Angela had first heard about the case from a former employee, a young woman named Tasha, who had reached out to her after months of being ignored by HR. Tasha's story was heartbreaking. She had been passed over for promotions, subjected to racist comments, and eventually forced out of her job after filing a complaint. Angela had listened, her anger growing with every word. She had seen cases like this before, but something about Tasha's story struck a chord. Maybe it was the way Tasha's voice shook as she spoke, or the way she refused to back down, even when it felt like the world was against her. Whatever it was, Angela knew she had to help. The case had started small, with just a handful of employees coming forward, but as Angela dug deeper, she uncovered a pattern of behavior that was impossible to ignore. Dozens of employees, most of them Black or Latino, had similar stories. They spoke of being overlooked for promotions, paid less than their white colleagues, and subjected to microaggressions on a daily basis. Some had even been fired after speaking out. The evidence was overwhelming, but when Angela filed the lawsuit, she quickly realized that taking on a corporation of this size was no easy task. The company had deep pockets, a team of high-powered lawyers, and a reputation to protect. And then there was the judge, a man who seemed determined to side with the corporation at every turn. As Angela sat in the now empty courtroom, she thought about Tasha and the others who had trusted her with their stories. She thought about her father, about the countless hours she had spent studying, working, fighting to get to where she was. And she thought about the judge, the way he had looked at her when she revealed her badge. There had been a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even fear. But there had also been something else, something harder to read. Was it respect, doubt, anger? Angela wasn't sure, but she knew one thing. The game had changed. The judge could no longer dismiss her as just another plaintiff. She was a U.S. attorney, and she had the full weight of the Department of Justice behind her. The hour-long recess felt like an eternity. Angela used the time to gather her thoughts, reviewing her notes and preparing for whatever might come next. She knew the corporation's lawyers would be doing the same, scrambling to come up with a strategy to counter her revelation. She also knew that the judge would be under pressure, his every move scrutinized. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was a spectacle, and everyone in the room knew it. When the court reconvened, the tension was even thicker than before. The judge took his seat, his expression unreadable. The corporation's lawyers were visibly on edge, their earlier confidence replaced with nervous energy. Angela remained calm, her posture steady, her eyes focused. She had come too far to back down now. The judge cleared his throat, his voice quieter than before. "Ms. Carter," he began, using her formal title for the first time, "I must admit, your revelation has complicated matters. I need to understand why you chose to conceal your identity until now." Angela stood, her voice clear and unwavering. "Your Honor, I didn't conceal my identity to deceive the court. I did it because I wanted this case to be decided on its merits, not on who I am or what I represent. But when it became clear that the facts weren't being given the consideration they deserve, I had no choice but to reveal the truth. This case isn't just about me, it's about the people who have been wronged, the ones who have been silenced for too long. And I intend to make sure their voices are heard." The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. The room was silent, everyone waiting for his response. But before he could speak, one of the corporation's lawyers stood, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Ms. Carter's actions are a clear attempt to manipulate the proceedings. We move to have her claims dismissed." Angela didn't flinch. She had expected this, and she was ready. "Your Honor," she said, her tone firm, "if anyone is manipulating these proceedings, it's the defense. They've spent this entire hearing trying to discredit me and dismiss the evidence, but the facts speak for themselves. I urge you to consider the testimony of the witnesses, the documents we've submitted, and the pattern of behavior that has been allowed to continue for far too long. This case deserves to be heard." The judge hesitated, his gaze shifting between Angela and the defense team. The room was electric with anticipation, the outcome hanging in the balance. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured. "I need time to consider this matter further. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. He slammed his gavel, and the room erupted into chaos. As Angela gathered her things, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. Some looked at her with admiration, others with suspicion. But she didn't care. She had done what she needed to do, and she wasn't going to stop until justice was served. As she stepped out of the courtroom, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Tasha. I just heard what happened. Thank you for not giving up on us. Angela smiled, a small but determined smile. She knew the fight wasn't over, but she also knew she wasn't alone, and that was enough to keep her going.